Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. As you're no doubt aware, I'm new to the front bench, and this is the second time that I've been let loose at the dispatch box this week. So earlier this week, I had the pleasure of facing the Honourable Member for South West Hertfordshire, and today I'm delighted to face with the Honourable Member for East Hampshire for what I hope will be the first of many lively debates. I'd like to thank the Backbench Business Committee, my right honourable friend the member of Birkenhead, and the other honourable members across the House who have secured this very important debate. I'd also like to place on record my thanks to the IFS and the Resolution Foundation and other groups for their groundbreaking work on today's issue. Now, we've heard some extremely thought-provoking contributions from members today. The Right Honourable Member for Birkenhead set out his case most eloquently, stating that to bring these reforms next April is not acceptable and that the Government must carry out a proper due diligence of the reforms, focusing on a range of data groups such as decile groups, family type, the annual effect and life chances, to name but a few. I also commend the Right Honourable Member in making his comments today, in that he realised his previous nil cost reform suggestions would actually create a greater work penalty. This is the beauty of debate in this chamber. Sometimes we are convinced to change our mind on certain issues. Yes, I will do that.
Grateful to her giving way, because maybe I could address the Scottish Nationalist spokesman. I emphasised that I put forward one idea to begin initiating debate. Absolutely. I put three others today, and I hope they're not going to use that as a cop-out for not giving a very clear message to the Government on the very point she's just made.
I thank the Right Honourable Member for his intervention. Now, I also highlight the comments that the Right Honourable Member made earlier, stating that the people we should be saluting and cheering are sick with worry at the moment. Now, countless members on the opposite benches spoke out against the Government's plans today, and I commend them wholeheartedly. We heard from the Honourable Member for Stevenage, who did not feel he could support the Government on the statutory instrument because he had families coming to his surgery all the time who are frightened. We heard from the Honourable Member for Aberconway, who stated that we need to look at this issue again to create a system that does not penalise the very poorest in society. Then we heard from the Honourable Member for Tiverton and Honiton, who said that everything he believes in as a Conservative is to get people into work, but there's a real risk that these proposals will do completely the opposite. Then we heard from the Honourable Member for Halton Price and Howden, who said this policy was a mistake and highlighted the absence of a proper impact statement. Then we had a refreshing change from this kind of dialogue from the Honourable Member for Morecambe and Lonsdale, who was one of the few opposite bench members today who applauded the Chancellor and championed some of the so-called measures that the Government would use to offset the tax credit losses. We then heard from the Honourable Member for Colchester, who supported the call for mitigation, the Honourable Member for Twickenham, who fully supports high wage claims by the Chancellor but agrees that those at the lowest end of the income scale must be protected. Then we heard from the Honourable Member for North Cornwall, who broadly supports the Government's proposals, and then in stark contrast, the Member for Harrow East, who supported an examination of the proposals. Then we heard from the Honourable Member for Colne Valley, who supported other members in the need to reconsider the pace of change. Then we heard from the Honourable Member for Waveney, who agreed with the need to review the measures and that more transitional support was needed. Then the Member for Torbay, who supported the motion because his family was rich in love growing up but poor in money, and he realised the effect that the proposals may have on aspiration in the long term. Then we heard from the Member for Stafford, who cited JFK and stated that if we see everything in terms of income, we are a poorer society. I also applaud his condemnation of trickle-down economics, and he made some very refreshing comments about improving the national insurance system. And then moving on to this side of the chamber, we heard from the Honourable Member for Darlington, who outlined that the fear of what is going to happen is out there already and the Government must act quickly. Then we heard from the Honourable Member for Don Valley, who highlighted the distributional impact of the cuts were severely aggressive. Then the Honourable Member for Ogmore, who said that his mailbag was full of people who are terrified of what is to come. And then the Honourable Member for Birmingham Selly Oak, who highlighted this side's desire to ensure that we build an economy where families don't need to rely on tax credits, but it's a mistake to take money from the working poor before their wages have risen. Then we heard comments from the member for Ealing at Central and Acton, who stated that the Chancellor could still change his mind, and we would welcome that on this side. And then the member for Lewisham and Deptford, who highlighted the risk of struggling families and the fact that they may fall into debt. Then we heard from one of my neighbours, the Honourable Member for Haywood and Middleton, who highlighted the potential increase to child poverty. And then we heard from the Honourable Member for Nottingham, who, and I have to say I share his sentiments, stated that how lovely today's debate was. It's like a collective of all the sensible people, and maybe the government should have done things this way in the first place. And then we heard from the Honourable Member for Edmonton, who highlighted that 72% of people in her constituency receive tax credits. Then the member for St Helens South and Wiston, who outlined, quite worryingly, that her constituency was the 7th highest in terms of unemployment poverty. Then we also heard from the Honourable Members for Airdrie and Shotts, who confirmed that we can do much better than this. The Honourable Member for Arfon, who highlighted the disincentivising effects, especially the impact on under-25s. The Honourable Member for Kilmarnock and Loudon, who quite rightly asked the Government to revisit its tax avoidance policies. The Honourable Member for Dumfries and Galloway, who highlighted the worry that his local economy would be affected by tax credit cuts because those on low incomes are more likely to holiday in Scotland generally. Then we heard from the Honourable Member for East Antrim, who was broadly supportive of the Government's proposals but questioned the issue of timing. Then the Honourable Member of Inverness, Nairn, Badenoch and Strathspey, who highlighted household debt issues and the potential to exacerbate an already serious problem. And then last but not least, we heard from the Honourable Member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber, who said that we need to drive a sustainable economic growth, and you don't do that by taking £4.5 billion out of the economy. Now, the motion before the House today is certainly timely in light of the events which occurred in the other place this week, and I make clear that we support the position of our noble friends that these proposals should not go ahead, certainly until there has been a proper consultation, a government response to the distributional analysis conducted by the Institute for Fiscal Studies, and mitigation, reform or indeed withdrawal if appropriate. From the names on the motion and the contributions we have heard across the Chamber today, it's clear that there is widespread pressure which spans all parties within this House for the Government to firstly carry out and publish a detailed and adequate impact assessment of the cuts to tax credits, and secondly, following such assessment, to detail proposals which will ensure that no family is worse off. Now, we're clear on this side of the House that if the Government commits to ensuring that no family will be worse off as a result of amended proposals, we will put the interests of those families above party political considerations, and we will not attack the Government for doing so. And quite frankly, I cannot think of any recent occasion when any opposition has made such an offer, so I would call upon the Minister to truly listen to the contributions today. This House is at its best when we use the power of debate to convince other members to believe in the merits of a particular argument, whatever our deeply held values or ideologies. On rare but welcome occasions such as today, we do actually reach a consensus in this House over certain issues. So I do hope that the Minister and members present will agree that the Government's policy on tax credits needs to be reviewed and changed. Now, to anticipate what he might say in response, the Minister and myself do agree on one key point. It is necessary to reduce the deficit over the economic cycle. Where we disagree, however, is the economic strategy used to achieve this. And I don't believe that the Government's plans achieve that goal either fairly or effectively. In fact, over the long term, their savage cuts with the resultant pressure they bring to other parts of the welfare system would achieve quite the opposite. And as we've been reminded in today's debate, the Prime Minister denied any need or plan to cut tax credits during the election. The Minister must understand, therefore, that members of the public, especially those who voted Conservative, are quite rightly very angry. Now, cuts to tax credits would mean that more than 3 million families will be on average £1,300 worse off next year. Some working families will be losing nearly £3,500 a year. £2.5 billion has been found for an inheritance tax cut benefiting the wealthiest 4% of people in this country, yet at the same time, £4.5 billion is being taken out of the pockets of low and middle income families. The Treasury's own analysis and that of the Resolution Foundation shows that the cuts to tax credits based on the government's current proposals will put another 200,000 children into poverty, when already 500,000 more children are in poverty today than in 2010. Now, we're told by the government that cuts to tax credits will be compensated by the so-called living wage. Let me be clear on this. They will not. In fact, the Institute for Fiscal Studies made it quite clear that the increase in the minimum wage simply cannot provide full compensation for the majority of losses that will be experienced. It will just be arithmetically impossible. We're grateful for their analysis, of course, because the government has refused to publish an adequate version of their own. And the research of the IFS shows further that because of the different profile and scale of families and individuals on the minimum wage versus those in receipt of tax credits, an increase in the minimum wage, though welcome, will not mitigate the effect of these cuts, and the average family will still be significantly worse off. And of course, the rise in the minimum wage was accompanied by £4 billion worth of giveaways in cuts to corporation tax. We're also told that the government will compensate for losses to income by providing 30 hours free childcare for 3- and 4-year-olds. Now, in my own constituency of Salford and Eccles, our Labour Council already provides 25 hours of free childcare, but demand currently far outstrips supply. The Preschool Learning Alliance has warned that councils are already paying childcare providers insufficient hourly rates to provide the existing hours of free childcare, and going up to 30 would push many providers to breaking point. So if the Minister intends to cite childcare as the answer to tax credit cuts, perhaps he can confirm that the 30-hour scheme will be properly funded and will not push providers to the limit. So in conclusion, Mr Speaker, in my constituency of Salford and Eccles, over 61% of families are receiving tax credits. They're not the so-called scroungers we hear about. They're men and women who are working hard, trying to build a future for themselves and their children. They're trying to lift their children out of poverty and provide them with the nourishment and financial support they need, so maybe, just maybe, they won't have to suffer the same hardship that their parents did. Now, we've heard about the American dream, but there's no equivalent British dream for these people. They work hard and get nowhere. Low-paid, unskilled work is often the order of the day for many. For some, it's a case of trying to build up a business to be proud of, and for others, they simply juggle work with the responsibility of caring for loved ones. It's clear, then, that the government's claims that tax credit cuts will not cause any family to be worse off simply do not stand up to scrutiny. These families deserve a future, and as such, we will support this motion.